welcome to my first screencast. Today we are taking a look at array collections in Flash Builder Beta 2. We're going to build just a simple Flex application. So let's get started. We create a new Flex project, a web project. We give it a name of array tests and click Finish. We wait for the project to load. And we jump into design view, where we alter the application size to the default size, and we drag in one data grid. We're going to need some data to display in the data grid, so I'll just drag in two XML files into the default package. As you can see, there's one with many persons in, and there's one with only one person in. We will now alter the data grid to reflect our XML file. We only need two columns. Column 1, we bind to the field name, and we give it a name of name. Column 2, we bind to the field of status, and we give it a name of status. Some adjustments to the data grid, and we are ready to get our search field. We drag in an H group to hold our components, adjust the size of it, and we'll find a label, drag it in, and a text input, and drag it in. Okay, let's adjust that some, and then we jump into code view. We'll set the vertical alignment of the H group to middle, so it's centered vertically, and we'll add a spacer that's 100% wide in order to push all the components to the right. We take a look at it, and that looks good. And we rename the label to search. And let's give the search field an ID of, let's say, search input. Okay, let's test it. Looks like it's working fine. Now we need to load our data into the application. We do that in the declarations section. We add an HTTP service, we give it an ID of myserv and a URL of the sev.xml. We also need the two handlers, fault handler. We just let Flex generate both the fault and the result handler. The code for a fault handler is pretty straightforward. We just use an alert to tell the user that something went wrong, and the title to inform the user what kind of fault we have encountered. Then we define a property that is to hold our loaded data. It's a bindable private array collection. We use the keyword bindable in square brackets. We call it persons of type array collection. Also notice that the array collection class is automatically imported, so you don't have to do this manually. Now let's take a look at the data coming in through our HTTP service. We do this by setting a breakpoint in the result handler and calling the HTTP service using the send method of myserv. When we test it, we'll be asked to go into debug mode. where we can make our way into the event, look at the result, and look at the people and the person. We notice that this is an array collection. And why is this important? Well, let's try to load an XML file with only one person in it, namely the one XML file, and do the same thing. We go into debug mode, twirl down, and now we see that person is an object proxy, not an array collection. This is important because if you try to assign an object to an array collection, your application will crash. So we need to check for it. And here's how you do it. You use an if statement and see if the person is of type array collection. If it is, you can assign it directly, like this, to your person's array collection. To be safe, we also want to cast this as an array collection. So if it's an object, then we need to create an array collection. Let's create one, call it buffer, of type array collection. The array collection takes an array, and we pass it an array of one object, and this object is the person object, because we know this is an object, and then we can just assign the buffer to the person's array. Whoops. Okay, so the correct path is event result people person. We now need to tell the data grid where to fetch its data. We do this through the data provider property, and we give it the person's array collection. Let's test it. Looks like it's working. It's loading the one person. So doing filtering on one person is stupid. So let's use the XML with the several persons in it. And we'll also want to disable the filtering or search field if there is only one person in the result, because you can't filter on one person. The array collection has a method called filter function, which will do filtering on individual items in the array collection. We need to provide that function that will determine if that individual element is valid or not. It takes one object and returns a boolean value. We want to filter on the name property of the item. In order to do that, we check the content of the search input field. If that content is found in the item name property, then we return true and that name will be shown in the list. If it's not a match, then we return false and the name will not be shown in the list. We want a case-insensitive search, so we cast both the item name to lowercase and the search input to lowercase. To trigger the filtering, we'll be listening for the change event broadcast by the search input field, so we'll need to handle that event. In the change handler generated by Flex, we simply use our array collection persons and call its filter function and point to our filter function above. Then we'll need to call the refresh method of the array in order for the changes to take effect. Now let's test it. Let's do some sorting and do some filtering. Looks like it's working. Great. The source code for this and all future screencasts can be found at the URL at the bottom of your screen.